all the craziness that we've watched in Washington, all the politics that we've seen in Washington, all the dysfunction that we've seen in Washington, now it is unacceptable. Because what government does today will literally determine how many people live and how many die. And that's not hyperbolic, and that's not overly dramatic. That is just a fact. That federal government has to be able to pass legislation. To pass legislation, it has to be on a bipartisan basis. You have the Congress, the House is controlled by Democrats, the Senate is controlled by Republicans. Unless you get a bipartisan agreement, you're not going to pass legislation. If you don't pass legislation, the federal government does not work. If the federal government doesn't work, it makes it virtually impossible for state governments to work. If I can't work, then local governments can't work. This is not something that a state can control. Well, the governors are in charge, governors are in charge. I can only be in charge to the extent I have the resources and the means. And that comes from the federal government. Not just for New York, but for every state in this country. So that federal government has to work. And the legislation that they pass is important. And they have to pass legislation. And that only happens on a bipartisan basis. There is no choice. Well, just the Democrats can do it. Well, just the Republicans can do it. They cannot. It takes two to tango. It takes two houses to pass a bill. And one is Democratic and one is Republican. So, the facts are important. The President gave an interview, as reported in the New York Post. Blue state coronavirus bailouts are unfair to Republicans. Bailouts. This is the topic of whether or not the federal government should provide aid to state governments. And it's been a discussion for weeks. The federal government has passed legislation in the past that helped airlines, helped small businesses, helped hotels. Great, great. They haven't provided any aid to state and local governments. Well, why is that important? It's the state and local governments that fund police, fire, education, teachers, healthcare workers. If you starve the states, how do you expect the states to be able to fund this entire reopening plan? Well, the governors are in charge. But the states are in dire financial circumstances because our economy suffered when all the businesses shut down. So the debate now is, well, it's the blue states that have the coronavirus. Okay, New York they call a blue state. California they call a blue state. And the Republicans are saying, we don't want to give money to the blue states. First of all, this is not a blue state issue. Every state has coronavirus cases. And it's not just Democratic states that have an economic shortfall. Republican states have an economic shortfall. Well, it's the mismanagement of blue states for decades that they now want us to bail out. That's just not a fact. It is not a fact. First of all, no blue state was asking for a bailout before this coronavirus. I wasn't asking for anything from the federal government before the coronavirus. And by the way, the federal government wasn't giving New York anything for years. Everything they were doing was negative to New York. Then comes the coronavirus. Our economy stops because we shut it down. Now we have a $13 billion deficit because we stopped the economy. So what we're asking, every state is asking, because of the coronavirus, we need financial help in restarting the economy. And that's what we're asking for from the federal government. How do you call that a bailout, which is such a loaded word, such a rhetorical, hyperbolic word? It's a bailout. There's no bailout. Because of the coronavirus, this nation has been impacted and states have been impacted because the states make up the nation. And we need financial help because of the coronavirus situation. And this is not any mismanagement by the states. If anything, the mismanagement has been on behalf of the federal government. And that's where the mismanagement has gone back decades. Senator Moynihan, God rest his soul, New York senator, great man, said decades ago that New York has been continually shortchanged by the federal government. Why? Because we have always given them more money than they gave us back. Right? How does the federal government work? The federal government collects taxes and puts it all in a pot, and then takes money from that federal pot and gives it back to the states. Every year, New York State has put more money into that federal pot than the federal government has given back. Every year for decades. And that is just a fact. Also, you want to try to divide. The facts are, it's the Democratic states, which happen to have now high coronavirus content, which actually have put in more money than the Republican states, who are now saying, why should we bail out the Democratic states? The Democratic states have been supporting them for years. New York, every year, $29 billion more paid in than it gets out. New Jersey, also a high coronavirus state, $18 billion more every year than it gives out. Massachusetts, Connecticut, California. And then you look at the Republicans who now say, well, we don't want to help the Democratic states. They are actually the states that have been taking more every year. Virginia, Maryland, Kentucky. Senator Mitch McConnell, he's Kentucky, $37 billion more every year. Alabama, Florida. Everything's about Florida. Why? Because it's a swing state, and we're in an election year. I get it. Florida gets $30 billion more every year than it puts in. What are you talking about? Fairness, equity, bailout. You look at where we've been over the past 5 years, we paid in $116 billion more than we gave back. You want to be fair, just give New York back the money you took, and it'd be $116 billion. Who gives and who takes? We know those facts and we know the numbers. But look, this whole discussion that Senator McConnell is raising, that some senators are raising, this is counterproductive, and it will lead to defeat for all of us. You need a bipartisan bill to pass. You go down this path of partisanship and politics, you will never pass a bill. And if you never pass legislation, you'll never get this economy back on its feet. So you go down this path of division, you will defeat all of us because we're all in the same boat. There is no separating us. It's still the United States of America. In this partisanship, we have to turn the page. I know it's how Washington operates. I know it's how Washington has been operating for many years. But we have to stop, and we have to change. And you do need a totally different mindset. It can't be, it's you versus me. It has to be we, right? We the people. If you don't get back to we and you think about a collective interest, you're going to defeat us all. Because it can't happen. And you have to get out of this Democrat, Republican, it's red or blue. It's not red or blue. It's red, white, and blue. This coronavirus doesn't pick Democrats or Republicans. It doesn't kill Democrats or Republicans. It kills Americans.